On July 9th, 2026, Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced launched to the best reviews this franchise has seen in over a decade. It should have been the easiest win Ubisoft has had in years. Instead, on launch day, the game's own developers were standing outside Ubisoft Barcelona on strike. This studio was one of the 15 studios that built this remake. Over 51 developers were being shown the door and their team disbanded days after they finished this game, striking on the very same day it released. Another studio, Ubisoft Belgrade, had already been shut down entirely back in June. So, how does a single remake get spread across 15 different studios, and how does a company as big as Ubisoft stay this broken? What is going on with the Assassin's Creed franchise? 1 month before the launch of the game, 51 employees at Ubisoft Barcelona are told they're being laid off. The studio's Assassin's Creed team is disbanded days after finishing its work on the game. The team had been worrying for almost a year. Back in summer of 2025, with the remake heading towards the finish line, nothing new had been assigned to them yet, so they started asking what came next. According to Insider Gaming, they kept asking for months and never got an answer. The team pitched brand new Assassin's Creed projects of their own to keep the studio alive, and the answer came back from a subsidiary called Vantage Studios. There would be no further work for Barcelona. Employees who spoke to Insider Gaming said the layoffs felt premeditated, like they were going to happen no matter how well the game did. The studio's launch celebration was cancelled and downgraded to a small catered get-together at the office. Barcelona, however, didn't go quietly. The workers organized through their union, the CGT, and called strikes every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon from June 30th through July 16th, demanding job protections and the return of work from home. The game was climbing the Steam charts while the people who built it stood outside the studio that cut them. By the end of July, nearly a third of the Barcelona office will be gone. One QA lead, 7 years at the studio, posted on LinkedIn saying this is not how he imagined it would end. So how does a company do this to a team that shipped its biggest hit in years? To answer that, you have to understand how Ubisoft actually builds these games. Over 15 studios worked on Black Flag Resynced, which is not unusual. It's how every modern Assassin's Creed gets made, and it works a lot like modern Call of Duty. One lead studio owns the creative vision, and support studios around the world are each handed a slice. One does the naval combat, one builds a city district, and another handles QA or UI or cutscenes. If you're a support studio, you don't decide what the game is, you execute your piece and pass it along. The lead here was Ubisoft Singapore, and the choice made sense. After nearly a decade of building ship and naval combat for Skull and Bones, a project that originally spun out of Black Flag, they knew this game's DNA better than anyone. To keep 15 studios moving at all times on a single project, Ubisoft uses a model called Follow the Sun. Work on a game never stops. Singapore hands off to Europe, Europe hands off to North America, and by the next morning, it's Singapore's turn again. And on paper, this model should hypothetically work really well. Instead of having developers concentrated in a high cost of living area like California or Seattle, you can hire from a low cost of living area and continuously see development on a game at the same time. It's the same model that companies like EA adopted for Battlefield 6, for example. In practice, however, this means coming into work to discover someone on the other side of the world has already changed the code you were writing yesterday. And before you can move forward, you first have to understand what changed. That's one piece of fine print in the system, and it's a piece that decided Barcelona's fate. A support studio doesn't own anything. Its survival depends entirely on the C-suite handing its next assignment. And at Ubisoft, those assignments usually arrive before the current project even wraps up, sometimes even a full year in advance. Now, go back to Ubisoft Barcelona in the summer of 2025. They were asking about their next project and hearing nothing. Inside this company, the silence was the answer. They just had to finish the game before anyone would say it out loud. The other thing you need to know is that Ubisoft was already failing. In 2024, however, Ubisoft was telling a very different story. They claimed that they had record bookings and were doubling down on the multi-studio blockbuster model. But that model only works if the blockbusters keep coming. And by 2025, they absolutely were not. Star Wars Outlaws underperformed, Skull and Bones, 10 years in the making, was dead on arrival, and when the company stopped producing hits, Ubisoft didn't fix it. They started selling it for parts. In January 2026, Ubisoft canceled 7 games and delayed 6 more. The company was reorganized into 5 new structures called creative houses, with half of its studios grouped inside of them and everyone else moved into support functions. Half the company makes games now, and the other half exists to serve them. Then the biggest move of all, Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six. The 3 franchises keeping the lights on at Ubisoft were pulled out and placed into a brand new subsidiary, and Tencent paid 1.16 billion euros for a 26% stake in it. For the first time, Ubisoft doesn't fully own the franchises that built the company. That subsidiary's name is Vantage Studios, the same Vantage that told Barcelona there would be no further games for them to make. One of the first real decisions Assassin's Creed's new stewards made was that the team that was finishing its biggest comeback in history had no future in it. And the numbers underneath all of this desperation, for the 2025 to 2026 fiscal year, Ubisoft posted a record annual loss of almost 1.5 billion euros. In a year where nothing basically shipped except for Anno 117. 1,200 jobs were cut in 12 months, on top of thousands before that, taking the company from over 20,000 people at its peak down to around 16,600 people. And then there's a layer of history that makes the Tencent deal even stranger. 10 years ago, the media giant Vivendi tried to swallow Ubisoft in a creeping hostile takeover, and the Guillemot family, the brothers who founded the company, spent years and a fortune trying to fight them off. Independence became Ubisoft's entire identity at that point. The White Knight who helped them finally push Vivendi out in 2018 was actually Tencent, and since then, Tencent has bought into Ubisoft, then into the family's own holding company, and now into the subsidiary that holds the franchise still making money. The family that spent years fighting one takeover has been selling the company anyway, just slowly and on their own terms. And Vantage has 2 co-CEOs. One is a longtime Ubisoft veteran, and the other is part of the family. Studios are closing, a fifth of the workforce is gone, and the family's grip on what's left hasn't loosened an inch. If Black Flag Resynced had been a lazy cash grab that flopped, this would still be a very sad story, but at least the layoffs would follow a logic you could understand. This is not what happened though. The game is sitting at an 84 on Metacritic, the franchise's best score in over 10 years. It also sold over 2 million copies, which eclipses Assassin's Creed Shadows. This also means Ubisoft's biggest critical win in a decade is a remake of a game from 2013. Their most celebrated release in years is the last time everybody liked them. They didn't phone it in either. This isn't a remaster with a coat of paint. The game was rebuilt from the ground up on the modern Anvil engine and ships with 0 code from the original. It includes ray tracing, dynamic weather, environmental destruction, and new real content on top of the original story, with new arcs for the characters. They even made the tailing missions less miserable, which anyone who's played the original will recognize as the single greatest technical achievement in franchise history. Ubisoft Singapore spent 10 years on Skull and Bones and finally shipped a hit by going back and remaking the game it spun out of, with pre-orders ranking amongst the best in franchise history, and one analyst claiming Steam pre-orders ran more than 5 times higher than Assassin's Creed Shadows. Everyone who touched this game should have been getting a raise. However, you already know what Barcelona got instead, because months before the game shipped, the company had decided which of the 15 studios building it would no longer still exist. The game succeeding and the team dying were never competing outcomes. And Barcelona is just one example. Ubisoft Belgrade, another studio on this game, was shut down entirely in June, along with Ubisoft Winnipeg. Ubisoft Halifax was closed shortly after its developers unionized, and a week later, 55 people were cut across Massive Entertainment and Ubisoft Stockholm. And when Ubisoft closed Winnipeg and Belgrade, they reportedly tried to put a press embargo on the announcement, an embargo on the layoffs. Embargoes are for trailers and for review scores. Ubisoft looked at people losing their jobs and decided what that moment needed was a coordinated rollout. It would be easy to end this video on why Ubisoft is a bad company, but this story where a team ships a successful game and gets gutted anyways is repeating across the whole industry. Id Software launched its big Doom Dark Age expansion in the middle of major cuts to the studio. Battlefield Studios was hit with layoffs after Battlefield 6, which was a legitimate hit for them. And, of course, we know Bungie was carved up after Sony's sunset Destiny 2. The industry is quietly reorganizing itself around a new rule. Your job lasts exactly as long as your project does. Ship the game, and unless somebody in the C-suite already decided they need you for the next one, you're completely gone. Whether the game was good doesn't really factor in, and whether it sold didn't factor in either. Game development, an industry that asks for years of your life per project, is turning into gig work with extra steps. To be fair to Ubisoft, the company lost €1.5 billion in 1 year. The alternative to cutting 1,000 jobs might be losing all 16,000, and a dead Ubisoft employs nobody. But the people paying the price for the company's failures are never the people who designed the company. The executives who greenlit 10 years of Skull and Bones, who bet everything on the blockbuster factory, and who sold a quarter of Assassin's Creed to patch the balance sheet are still up there. And Barcelona, Ubisoft's premier studio, no longer is. And while we're talking about Ubisoft Singapore, I just want to recognize the arc that team had. Skull and Bones started as a multiplayer mode for the original Black Flag. It grew into its own game, got announced in 2017, and then missed every release date it was ever given. Delayed at least 6 times over the better part of a decade, rebooted repeatedly and reportedly kept alive because of the subsidies that the Singaporean government required from Ubisoft to actually ship it. And by the time it launched in 2024, Ubisoft was defending the price by calling it a quadruple A game. A phrase that I'm sure you all know of already. Regardless of the failures of Skull and Bones, by the way, let me know if you want to see a video on that, because there's a lot to talk about with that game. Somehow, the team convinced Ubisoft that chasing a live service pirate fantasy wasn't going to work, and that the hit for that studio was sitting in the 2013 back catalog the whole time, ready for them to remaster. A great game and mass layoffs on the same Thursday. Here's the uncomfortable answer to how that happens. The franchise itself is fine. Assassin's Creed itself, the product, might be in the best shape it's been in for years. It's the people who make Assassin's Creed who are in trouble. We've built an industry where a game and the humans behind it can move in opposite directions at the same time. Where an 84 on Metacritic and 2 million copies sold within the first week aren't enough to avoid mass layoffs. Where the reward for shipping your company's biggest hit in years are the real humans behind the game having to figure out if they can put food on the table for the next week. And ironically, Black Flag is a game about pirates. People the empires used while they were useful and hunted when they weren't. Edward Kenway spends the whole game learning that the people at the top never value him the same way he values himself. 13 years later, Ubisoft remade that game across 15 studios, shipped it to critical acclaim, and proved the point better than the game ever could. Is this just what the industry is now? And if a game can't save the people who made it, what can? Let me know in the comments your thoughts on the whole Ubisoft